There is a specific kind of quiet that only exists deep in the woods at night, not silence. The forest is never truly silent. It is more like the world exhaling. The birds stop. The wind drops. The trees stop swaying and just stand there, still and dark and enormous, like they are holding their breath along with you. Most people find it peaceful. Daniel used to be one of those people. He was 28 years old, a software engineer from Portland who spent his weeks trapped inside a glass office building, staring at screens until his eyes burned. The forest was the only place that made him feel human again. He had been going to the same clearing in the Willamette National Forest since he was 12 years old, half a mile off the main trail. Unmarked private, known only to him and the memory of his father who had first brought him there. He went alone that September. He always went alone. It had been a brutal few weeks at work, the kind of exhaustion that gets into your bones and doesn't leave no matter how much you sleep. He needed the forest the way other people need medication. He packed his truck on a Wednesday night without overthinking it and drove out before sunrise on Thursday. By early afternoon, he was in the clearing. By 5, his tent was up, fire ring ready. Food hung high in the trees, the way his father had taught him. He cooked dinner slowly, deliberately, canned chili and coffee and cornbread and foil on the coals, and sat watching the fire burn down with the specific peace of a person who has nowhere else to be and no one waiting on them. The sun went down. The forest went quiet. And Daniel, for the first time in months, felt completely at ease. He let the fire die to embers around 9, banked it carefully, and climbed into his tent. His headlamp clicked off at 9:42. He checked his watch out of habit, then set it on the ground beside him and closed his eyes. The creek 30 yards away. An owl somewhere above, the faint smell of wood smoke fading into pine. He was asleep in minutes. He does not know what woke him. Not a sound exactly. He described it to me as a change in pressure, the way a room feels different when someone walks into it before they've made a single noise. That awareness. That shift. He opened his eyes. The tent was completely black. His watch glowed green when he raised it. 11:47. He lay still and listened. Then he heard it. One footstep. The clean, deliberate compression of weight on damp leaves and soft earth. The kind of sound that has intention behind it. He told himself it was a deer. He had heard deer at night before. They were quiet animals, curious, not afraid of a dead fire ring. He lay there and waited for the sound to pass. The second footstep came. The third. And somewhere between the third and the fourth, Daniel understood with a cold and absolute certainty that what he was hearing was not a deer. The steps were upright, evenly spaced, two-footed, moving toward his tent from the north with the slow deliberateness of something that was in absolutely no hurry. He did not move. Every instinct in him said to sit up, grab his headlamp, unzip the door and face whatever was coming. But something older and quieter said no. Something that had been keeping humans alive in dark places for 10,000 years said, stay still, stay quiet, do not let it know you are awake. So he lay there. He controlled his breathing. His right hand found his father's folding knife on the tent floor without him consciously reaching for it. His fingers closed around the handle and stayed there. The footsteps stopped directly behind him, on the other side of the thin nylon wall, just inches from where his feet were. Something stood completely still. The silence that followed had weight. It had presence. It was not the silence of nothing. It was the silence of something that was also listening. Daniel held his breath. He counted. He needed something to do with his mind, so he counted. 1, 2, 3, up to 20, before he quietly exhaled and started again. Then the voice came. Low. Male. Calm. Terrifyingly calm. Not the voice of someone lost or confused or trying to get help. The voice of someone who knew exactly where they were and exactly what they were doing. 4 words. I know you're in there. Daniel stopped breathing. He told me that the worst part was not the words. The worst part was the tone. There was no anger in it, no threat, no urgency. It was almost gentle. The voice of someone who had been patient for a very long time and was simply letting you know that the waiting was over. He gripped the knife until the seams of the handle pressed into his palm. He did not respond. He did not move. He lay in the absolute dark and he did not make a single sound. The voice did not speak again. but the footsteps started up once more, and this time they began to circle. Slow, measured, working around the outside of his tent in a wide arc. Behind him, left, in front, right, behind again. Daniel tracked every step with his ears. He heard the footsteps cross the threshold of the tent door, directly in front of his face. He heard them move along the east wall facing the creek. He heard them complete the circle and begin another. One full rotation, then a second, each one identical in pace, in spacing, in the horrible patience of it. He had the thought, clear and sharp and nauseating, that whatever was outside was not in a hurry because it did not need to be, that he was in a sleeping bag in a thin nylon tent in the middle of the forest, and whatever stood on the other side of that fabric understood exactly what that meant. The second circle completed, the footsteps stopped somewhere to his left, and then nothing. Daniel lay there until dawn. He watched his watch. He counted minutes. He listened with everything he had to every sound the forest made, an owl returning around midnight, the creek steady and indifferent, the occasional movement of wind far above in the canopy. Nothing else. No voice. No footsteps. No sound he could not explain. At 5:43, the tent walls went from black to gray. He unzipped his door 1 millimeter at a time. He stepped out into the cold morning air and stood very still, looking at the clearing. Empty. Fire ring cold. Food bag undisturbed. Trees standing exactly where they had always stood. He walked to the north side of his tent, the direction the footsteps had first come from, and looked at the ground. It had rained 2 days before. Heavy overnight rain that left the soil soft and dark and perfectly receptive. The kind of ground that holds a boot print for days, that records the passage of a deer or a raccoon or a person with equal fidelity. He walked the full perimeter of the tent. He walked out to the tree line. He crouched and looked carefully, the way his father had taught him to read ground. There was nothing. Not a single footprint, not a compressed blade of grass, not one disturbance in the earth that surrounded his tent on every side. Earth that should have recorded 2 full circles and a long approach from the north as clearly as ink on paper. He stood at the tree line for a long time. Then he packed his tent in silence, loaded his truck, and drove home without stopping. He told his wife he'd had a rough night. She asked if he was all right. He said he was fine. He didn't tell her the truth for 3 weeks. When he finally did, she listened carefully. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said it was probably just someone messing with him. A drunk hiker. A local playing games. He nodded and said she was probably right. He has not been camping alone since that September. He sent me his story 7 months ago. At the very end, after all the details, after everything he described, he added one final line. He wrote, "What I cannot stop thinking about is the tone of the voice. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like someone who had been standing outside for a very long time and just wanted me to know they were still there. I have read that line many times now. I still don't know what to do with it. And I don't think Daniel does either." I want to pause here for a moment before we move on, because when Daniel first sent me this story, my instinct, like most people, was to look for the rational explanation. A drunk hiker who wandered into the wrong campsite. Someone playing a prank in the dark, the kind of thing that seems terrifying at the time and embarrassing in daylight. I tried to hold on to those explanations. Then I thought about the footprints. The Willamette soil after heavy rain is almost like wet clay. Park rangers use it to track wildlife. A 200-pound mule deer, with hooves smaller than your fist, leaves impressions nearly an inch deep. A full-grown man walking 2 complete circles around a tent and then standing still for an extended period of time would leave a track that a 10-year-old could follow in daylight. There was nothing, not one mark. I've thought about what that means many times now. I've gone back and forth between explanations and landed nowhere definitive. I don't think that's a failure. I think that's honesty. What I do know is this. Since starting this channel, I've received 4 other stories from solo campers in the Pacific Northwest. 4 different people, 4 different locations, different years, different seasons, different circumstances. Every single one of them mentions footsteps circling the tent at night. Every single one of them found nothing in the ground the following morning. I don't know what that pattern means, but I know it's a pattern. And I know that Daniel, an experienced outdoorsman who has been sleeping in wild places since he was a child, someone who knows every sound the forest makes at night, someone who is not prone to fear or exaggeration. I know that man has not slept alone in the wilderness since that September night. He still camps, he still loves it, he still needs it, but he always makes sure someone else is there. And he always makes sure they are still awake before the last of the light is gone. Make of that what you will. Our next story takes us east, to the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, to a campfire that was warm and bright and surrounded by friends, and to a man who appeared out of the dark with kind eyes and mountain stories, and who, in 25 minutes of comfortable conversation, did not blink once. There is one more thing I want to say about Daniel before we leave his story behind. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought near the end of his message, that the clearing he camped in was the same one his father had first taken him to as a boy, the place where he had learned to build a fire, to read ground, to hang food, to move through the wilderness with respect and patience. The place that felt more like home to him than anywhere else on earth. He has not been back. He said he does not think he ever will, and I find that, somehow, to be the saddest part of the whole thing. Not the voice, not the circling, not the empty ground in the morning. The fact that something took that place from him. That whatever stood outside his tent in the dark that night did not just frighten him. It followed him home. Sarah was the kind of person who noticed things. It was something her mother used to say about her when she was small. Sarah notices, not in the way of someone suspicious or anxious. She wasn't wired that way. It was more like she was tuned to a slightly different frequency than most people. The small things. The things that didn't quite fit. She was 31 years old. A high school art teacher from Morgantown, West Virginia. The kind of person who remembered the exact color of a sky she'd seen 3 years ago. Who noticed when someone's smile didn't quite reach their eyes. Who felt the mood of a room the moment she walked into it. That sensitivity, she told me, is the reason she caught it when most people wouldn't have. It is also the reason she still thinks about it every single time she tries to fall asleep outdoors. It was the second weekend of October. The Appalachian Mountains had gone full color, deep orange and burning red, and the particular gold that only exists for about 2 weeks a year before the cold strips it away. Sarah had been camping in the Monongahela National Forest with 2 friends every fall for 6 years. It was their tradition, a long weekend away from the world, from lesson plans and group chats and the low hum of ordinary life. Her friends that year were Jess and Ryan. Jess was her closest friend from college, quiet, perceptive, the kind of person who went long stretches without talking and never made it feel uncomfortable. Ryan was her neighbor, loud, funny, and capable of sitting still, the one who always brought too much food and ate most of it himself. They set up camp at a registered site they'd used before, familiar ground, a fire ring already in place, a flat clearing ringed by old growth trees, a trail marker visible from the tent. Nothing remote or off the beaten path, the kind of campsite that feels safe because other people have been there before you. The first night was perfect, that particular kind of perfect that only happens when the weather cooperates and the fire is exactly right and everyone is relaxed enough to let the conversation go wherever it wants. They stayed up late. They laughed a lot. Sarah went to sleep feeling like herself in a way she didn't always manage during the week. The second night started the same way. Jess had marshmallows. Ryan was in the middle of a story about a road trip he'd taken in his 20s. Something involving a broken-down car in a town that didn't appear on any map. And Sarah was refilling her tin cup from the camp kettle when she became aware that they were no longer alone. She felt it before she saw it, that shift in the air, that sense of additional presence. She looked up. A man was standing at the edge of the firelight, not inside the campsite, not on the path, at the exact boundary where the warm amber glow of the fire ended and the darkness began, standing there with the stillness of someone who had been there for a while and had simply decided it was time to be noticed. He was older, mid-60s, Sarah estimated, a full gray beard, neatly kept, red flannel shirt, worn jeans, heavy hiking boots with thick rubber soles, the kind that serious trail walkers use. He had the weathered look of a man who spent a lot of time outdoors. Creased skin, calm eyes, hands that looked used to work. He raised one hand in a small, apologetic wave. "Sorry to startle you all," he said. His voice was warm, southern, but not strongly, the flat vowels of someone who had spent time away and come back. "I could smell your fire from back a ways. My own camp is just over that ridge. Thought I'd come say hello if you don't mind the company." Ryan, being Ryan, immediately said, "Of course, come on in, there's plenty of room." The man, he said his name was Earl, came into the circle of firelight and sat down on an empty log across from Sarah. He accepted a cup of coffee when Ryan offered. He thanked Jess for the marshmallow she held out. He settled in with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his surroundings, which in itself was not unusual. Some people are just like that outdoors. He was good company at first. He told them about the mountains. Not tourist information, the real stuff. The kind that gets passed down through families who've lived in the same hollows for 150 years. He knew the old names for the trails, the ones that predate the Park Service. He knew which streams ran cold all year and which dried up in August. He talked about the changes he'd seen over 40 years of hiking these ridges. The trees that had come down, the animal populations that had shifted, the way the winters weren't quite what they used to be. Sarah found it genuinely fascinating. For the first 15 minutes, she couldn't have said exactly when the feeling started. It crept in the way cold does. Not a sudden drop, but a slow, incremental chill that you don't notice until you're already uncomfortable. She was watching Earl mid-sentence. He was describing a trail collapse he'd witnessed years ago somewhere up near Spruce Knob, and she noticed something that her brain initially filed away as unimportant and then retrieved, suddenly and insistently as anything but. He had not blinked. She watched him for another 30 seconds, telling herself she'd simply missed it. People don't always blink at regular intervals. She probably just hadn't been paying attention. He did not blink. His eyes were open with a steadiness that wasn't quite right, not the stare of someone intense or confrontational. His expression was relaxed, pleasant, engaged, but his eyes stayed wide and fixed and utterly still in a way that no human eye stays still. The firelight moved across them. His face moved when he spoke, but his eyes did not blink. Not once. Sarah pressed her knee slowly and deliberately against Jess's leg. Jess pressed back immediately. She had seen it too. Sarah looked at Ryan. Ryan was laughing at something Earl had just said, completely at ease, utterly oblivious. She almost said something, almost interrupted the conversation and made an excuse and moved them away, but something stopped her. Some instinct that said making a sudden move, drawing attention to the fact that she had noticed was not the right play. So she sat with it. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. She asked a question when the conversation required it. She kept her hands loose in her lap and her expression neutral and her eyes moving naturally between Ryan and Jess and Earl, and all the while the cold thing in her chest got heavier and heavier. Earl talked for another 10 minutes. His eyes did not blink once in all that time. Sarah finally said they were getting tired. Early morning planned, she said. They wanted to make the ridge before sunrise. She said it lightly, apologetically, the way you do when you genuinely like someone and feel bad about ending a good conversation. Earl smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine looking. Every muscle in his face moved the way it should. His eyes stayed exactly as they were. Of course, he said. You all have a good night now. Beautiful up here this time of year. He stood, returned the coffee cup to Ryan with a small nod of thanks, and walked back toward the edge of the firelight. You take care of yourselves, he said, already half in shadow, and then he walked into the darkness between the trees and was gone. The three of them sat in silence for a moment. Ryan said, "Nice guy." Jess said nothing. She already had her phone out. She had downloaded an offline trail map before they left Morgantown. They were out of cell service, but the map worked fine. She opened it now and found the campsite marker for the nearest registered camp in the direction Earl had come from. The direction he had pointed when he said his own camp was just over the ridge. She turned the phone so Sarah could see the screen. The nearest site was 11 miles away. 11 miles through dense old-growth forest on a moonless night, over terrain that even experienced hikers treated with respect in daylight. He had said his camp was just over that ridge. He had appeared out of the dark within minutes of smelling their fire. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Ryan, who had finally stopped smiling, said very quietly, "How far did you say?" 11 miles, Jess said. They packed their tent in under 15 minutes. Nobody suggested waiting until morning. Nobody argued. They move with the quiet, coordinated efficiency of people who have reached the same conclusion through different routes and don't need to discuss it. They were in Ryan's truck and moving down the mountain road within the hour. Sarah told me that nobody spoke for the first 40 minutes of the drive, not until they hit a town with gas stations and streetlights and other people, and Ryan pulled into a parking lot and turned off the engine and sat there for a second. Then he said, "Did either of you notice that he never blinked?" Jess said yes. Sarah said yes. Ryan put the truck back in drive. They have not returned to that campsite. Sarah sent me this story about 4 months ago. She had held on to it for a while before writing it down, she said, not because she doubted what had happened. She never doubted that. But because writing it down made it more real in a way she wasn't sure she was ready for. She added one detail at the very end of her message that she said she had almost left out because she wasn't certain it was relevant. She said, "I just want to mention one thing. The whole time Earl was with us. 25 minutes, maybe closer to 30. I never once heard him breathe. Not once. People breathe. You can hear it or feel it the way the air moves around a person who's sitting close to you. There was nothing. It was like sitting across from a very convincing photograph of a man. I've thought about that a great deal. A very convincing photograph of a man. I don't know what Earl was. I don't know where he came from or where he went after he walked back into those trees. I don't know if the 11 miles means what it seems to mean, or if there's an explanation I haven't found yet, but I know that 3 separate people, none of whom compared notes in the moment, all arrived at the same observations independently. He did not blink. He did not breathe. He walked out of a darkness that should have been impossible to walk out of in that amount of time. And he knew exactly where they were before they knew he was there. Whatever Earl was, he was not a fellow camper looking for warmth. Of that much, I am certain. The thing about Daniel's story and Sarah's story, the thing that connects them despite the different states, the different years, the completely different circumstances, is that in both cases, the people involved made a decision. Daniel decided to stay still. Sarah decided not to react. Both of them in the moment trusted something instinctive over something rational. Both of them made a call that they couldn't fully explain afterward. Only say that it felt right. I think about those decisions a lot. Because our third story tonight involves a man who made a different kind of decision. A man who stayed awake the entire night, not out of fear, exactly, though fear was certainly part of it, but out of something more deliberate, out of a refusal to look away. His name is Marcus. He's a former Marine. He's seen things that most people haven't, in places most people will never go. And he told me that what he watched from his camp chair in northern Michigan on an October night was the most unsettling thing he has ever experienced in his life. He wants you to know he does not say that lightly. Marcus wants you to know something before this story begins. He is not the kind of man who scares easily. He mentioned it in his very first line. He came back to it twice more before he was done, not out of arrogance. The way he wrote it, you could tell it wasn't that. It was more like he needed you to have that context before anything else. Needed you to understand the baseline before he told you what shook him. 2 tours in the Marines. Fallujah, Helmand Province, the kind of deployments that reshape a person at the cellular level, that rearrange what fear means and what it doesn't. He'd been in situations where the rational response was panic and had chosen, by training and by will, not to panic. He had held that line in places and circumstances that most people will never come close to. He was 43 years old when this happened, living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Working in logistics, raising 2 kids with his wife, doing the ordinary and necessary work of putting a life back together after the military is done with you. Every October, without fail, he and his younger brother Calvin drove up to the Upper Peninsula for what they called their brother's trip. Fishing, hunting, a week of being nowhere in particular with no one to answer to. They had done it every fall for 6 years. It was the thing Marcus looked forward to most all year. He brought his German Shepherd Rex. Rex was 8 years old. He had been with Marcus since he was a 10-week-old puppy, through 2 moves, a divorce, the difficult grinding years of transition out of the service. That dog had seen Marcus at his worst and stayed anyway. He was calm in a way that matched his owner. Unbothered. Solid. The kind of animal that made you feel like everything was probably fine just by being in the same room with you. Nothing rattled Rex. Marcus said that. He needed you to know that too. They set up camp in the early afternoon on the second day of the trip at a site they used before, a flat clearing in the hardwood forest about 2 miles off the main road, accessible by a rough 2-track that Ryan's truck handled without complaint. 2 tents. A fire ring they rebuilt from stones that were already there. A folding table for the camp kitchen. The whole thing went up in under an hour because they had done enough times to work without talking. The afternoon was good, clear sky, cold enough for jackets, the trees at full color, that particular UP combination of birch white and maple red that makes the whole forest look like it's on fire. They fished the creek in the late afternoon and caught nothing worth keeping and didn't care. Cooked dinner on the camp stove as the light faded. Talked the way brothers talk when they haven't seen each other in a while. Badly, mostly. Interrupting and contradicting and laughing at things that wouldn't be funny to anyone else. Rex lay by the fire the whole evening, relaxed, comfortable, until the sun finished going down. Marcus described it very precisely in his message. He said it was not gradual. The moment, the exact moment, the last pale light left the sky, Rex stood up. Not a slow rising, not the lazy stretch of a dog changing positions. He went from lying down to standing in one fluid motion, the way dogs move when something has their full attention, and he turned to face the tree line to the north, and he pressed himself against Marcus's legs. Marcus looked down at him. Rex was trembling. Not the fine, rapid shiver of a cold dog, a deep, slow trembling, the kind that comes from something closer to the core. His eyes were fixed on the trees. His ears were flat. He was not growling. He was not making any sound at all. He was simply watching the darkness between the trees with every cell of his body. Marcus looked up at the tree line. Nothing. Just the forest settling into night. Just the shapes of trunks and branches going dark against a sky that still held a little color at the western edge. He scratched Rex behind the ears. Told him it was all right, probably a deer working the edge of the clearing. Rex stayed where he was, pressed against Marcus's leg, trembling. Calvin noticed around then and raised an eyebrow. Marcus shrugged. He didn't want to make it into something, but he didn't stop watching the tree line either. He saw them 20 minutes later. 2 lights, small, round, a pale yellowish white, like old candlelight or phosphorescence. Something that didn't quite belong to any category of light Marcus could immediately name. Floating approximately 6 feet off the ground, maybe 40 yards into the trees, side by side, evenly spaced. The distance between them, Marcus said, was about the width of a human face. His first thought was a flashlight, a hiker with a headlamp, maybe 2 hikers walking close together. Someone who had gotten turned around in the dark and was working their way through the trees. He picked up his own flashlight, a heavy-duty military-grade torch, the kind that throws a beam you can read by at 50 feet, and shone it directly at the lights. They did not react. He held the beam on them for a full 30 seconds. Any eyes, human or animal, catch and reflect artificial light. It is simple biology. The tapetum lucidum in animals creates that distinctive shine. Human eyes pick up the beam and return it. Even a piece of glass or metal out in the trees would have thrown something back. These lights caught nothing. They did not brighten. They did not shift. They did not move away from the beam or toward it. They simply remained steady and unchanged, as if the light he was pointing at them was irrelevant. As if they existed by different rules. He called out, "Hello? Anyone out there? You need help?" His voice went into the trees and came back as nothing. Calvin was standing now at his shoulder, looking at the same spot. "You see that?" Marcus said. "Yeah," Calvin said. "Yeah," Calvin said. They stood there together for a moment. Then Calvin went back to his tent and zipped it shut. Marcus did not follow. He pulled his camp chair around to face the tree line and he sat down. Rex pressed against his legs, still trembling, still watching. Marcus put one hand on the dog's back and kept it there and settled in for what he already understood. On some level he couldn't fully articulate. It was going to be a long night. The lights did not move. For 5 hours, those 2 pale points of yellow-white sat in the darkness between the trees at a height of 6 feet and watched the camp, not occasionally, not intermittently, continuously, without variation, without rest, with a patience that Marcus said was the most inhuman thing about the whole experience. He watched them back. He tried to find a rational frame for what he was seeing. Ball lighting, but ball lighting moves and dissipates and doesn't last 5 hours. Some kind of bioluminescent organism, but nothing native to that forest produces light at that height and that intensity. Reflections from the camp. But he killed his lantern at midnight and the lights didn't change. He sat with it. He let the explanations run out one by one until there were none left. Around 2 in the morning, Calvin unzipped his tent and came out. He stood beside Marcus for a while without saying anything, looking at the lights in the trees. After maybe 10 minutes, he went back inside. He still hadn't said a word. Marcus stayed in his chair. He thought about his time overseas, about the nights on watch in places where the dark was genuinely dangerous, and the discipline of staying alert without letting your mind slide into fear was the difference between doing your job and failing at it. He had trained himself to hold that line, to be present and calm in the face of things that wanted to unsettle him. He held it that night, but he told me, and this is the part I keep returning to, he told me that what he felt all night was not the feeling of being threatened. It was not the feeling of imminent danger that he recognized from combat, that particular electrical aliveness that tells your body to move. It was something different, something he struggled to find words for. He said it felt like being studied, like whatever was standing in those trees had no intention of coming closer, at least not that night, and no need to, like it was content to simply observe, to learn the layout of the camp and the number of people in it and the patterns of who slept and who stayed awake, to gather information at the slow, methodical pace of something that had all the time in the world. At exactly 4:17 in the morning, Marcus checked his watch. He is precise about this. The lights went out, not dimmed, not drifted away, out, instantaneous. One moment they were there, unchanged, exactly where they had been for 5 hours. The next moment there was only the dark forest and the trees and the night sounds of the UPEC in October. Rex exhaled. It was a long, slow, shuddering breath, like a soldier finally stood down after hours on watch. He lay down at Marcus's feet, put his head on his paws, and was asleep within 2 minutes. Marcus sat for another hour. When the gray light came, he walked to the tree line. It had rained 3 days before, and the ground between the trees was soft and dark and receptive. He walked to the spot where he'd watched those lights for 5 hours. He could triangulate it precisely from the camp, the angle, the distance, and he looked at the ground. He crouched down and examined it carefully, the way the Marines had taught him to read terrain. There were no footprints, no impressions in the soft earth, no crushed vegetation, no broken branches at head height where something standing 6 feet tall would have disturbed the canopy. The ground was untouched. The forest at that spot looked exactly like every other spot in the forest, like nothing had ever been there, like nothing had ever stood there for 5 hours and watched. They broke camp that morning and drove home. They have talked about it once since then, Marcus and Calvin. A brief, careful conversation that ended quickly by unspoken mutual agreement. Calvin said he didn't know what it was. Marcus said he didn't know what it was. Marcus said he didn't either. That was where they left it. Marcus sent me his story 11 weeks ago. At the very end, after all of it, he wrote one paragraph that I have read more times than I can count. He wrote, "I want to be clear about something. I know what it feels like to be watched by something dangerous. I know the difference between a threat and a presence. What was in those trees was not trying to scare us. It was not angry. It was not hungry. It was patient. Whatever it was simply waiting. And the thing that I cannot shake, the thing that has stayed with me every night since, is this. I stayed awake. I did not fall asleep, and I believe with a certainty I cannot fully explain that this mattered, that something about that night depended on whether or not I closed my eyes, and that I made the right call by keeping them open. A former Marine. 2 combat deployments. A man who has made life and death decisions in the dark. And he needs you to know that keeping his eyes open that night was one of them. I don't know what was in those trees. I don't know what it wanted. But I know that Rex knew it was there before Marcus could see it. I know that it stood for 5 hours without moving and left no evidence behind. I know that it disappeared at the exact moment it chose to disappear. And I know that Marcus has not been back. 3 stories, 3 different forests, 3 different years, 3 people who had no connection to each other and will likely never meet. Daniel, lying still in the dark with his father's knife in his hand, listening to something circle his tent that left no footprints in soft earth. Sarah, sitting across a campfire from a man who appeared out of an impossible distance and did not blink, and did not breathe, and smiled like he knew something she didn't. Marcus, watching 2 lights, watch him back for 5 hours straight, in a spot where nothing stood and nothing left a mark. I don't have a neat conclusion for you, I never do. That's not what this is. What I have is this: the wilderness is real. The dark is real, and the feeling you get sometimes, in wild places, that you are not as alone as you assumed. That feeling has been with human beings since long before we had words for it. Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. But Daniel doesn't camp alone anymore. Sarah doesn't go back to that mountain, and Marcus keeps his eyes open. I'm Mr. Nocturn. If you have a story, something that happened to you in the dark, in the woods, in a place where no one should have been, the link to submit is in the description. Your name will be changed. Your story will be heard. New videos every week. Subscribe if you're ready for more. And tonight, before you sleep, check that your windows are locked. I'll see you in the next one.